Story 1. In 5th grade, I had this teacher who was very gruff. Most of us didn't like her because she was such a hard ass. Like military style, with discipline and homework completion. She wasn't mean, but she wasn't nice either. Then I found out my parents were getting a divorce. I showed up to school one day visibly upset, kinda shaky, and had obviously been crying. She basically grunt rasped, decidedly undecided. Hallway, now. I was so not in the mood to be scolded, and I knew I was a mess. I stomped out into the hallway, and she told me she knew what was going on at home, and asked me if I was okay, then listened to me sob and break down about how I felt. She gave me a hug, and asked if I wanted to spend an hour or so in the library since she knew I loved books, and then I could ground myself. It was so unexpectedly kind. I will never forget it. I found out later she was so gruff and short with us because she's been teaching for a long time, and kids are just mean. She had some sort of health condition that left her in pain most of the time, and she had to use a cane, which caused her to hunch a bit. Over the years, all the meanness of the kids made her a little hard and cold, but she really did care about her students. Story 2. In high school, one of my teachers had this duckbill whistle, literally shaped like a duck's bill, and it made a quacking noise. She used it to get the class's attention. One time, I guess we were being extra rowdy, and she blew the ever-loving crap out of it, and the class went stone dead quiet. She got this shocked look on her face, and then took her hairpin out and dropped it, and the whole class heard it hit the ground, and she got this big grin on her face. And we all just busted out laughing. Story 3. I faked my way through 4th and 5th grade math. I never understood how to do long division, but managed to hide that from the teachers and answer test questions by reverse multiplication. Basically, guess a number and multiply it out and see how close I would get, and keep doing it until I got the answer. My 6th grade math teacher figured out that I was faking, and that I had no idea how to actually divide anything. She had me come in one afternoon to help with cleaning the erasers. All the kids fought for this privilege, so I was thrilled. Sat me down and tutored me until I understood the concept. Bless you, Mrs. Gillespie. Story 4. At my high school, we had an annual week-long science trip, fully paid for by fundraising. Only 4 people were selected to go each year. My sophomore year, I was chosen. I knew there was no way I was going to be allowed to go. I had never been out of the state, never been on a single vacation, never been on a plane, and never been away from home for more than 24 hours. My parents were incredibly conservative and immediately said no. I had a science teacher who didn't accept the no. Instead of just giving up and selecting someone else, he called and tried to convince my parents. When that didn't work, he came to my house and had dinner with my family to convince my dad that I would be an asset and he would be doing me a disservice by not letting me go. He sat at our table and ate my mom's terrible cooking and talked to my parents for over 2 hours until he got a, "We'll think about it." Then he just kept following up. I had never had someone in my corner like that before, who was willing to go to bat for me like that. He wore them down, and it was the best week of my teenage life. I'd never seen the ocean. 20 years later, and I can still recall every detail of that trip. It was a major pivot point for me. Story 5. My physics teacher in high school hosted an annual trip to Walt Disney World in Orlando for 15 to 20 kids for over a week. I was one of the better and most interested students in his class. He was an incredible teacher who found examples in physics everywhere. He also used to work for Disney prior to teaching. Since my family was not so well off and I couldn't afford the trip to Walt Disney World, I declined when he asked me if I was going to join. He probed a bit and somehow found the funds to have me join without me even inquiring. I don't know if he pulled the school money or if there was a surplus, but either way, that was one of the best memories from that school, and I still keep in touch with him 15 years later. Story 6. She outed me for pretending to not speak English to my mom. I am Mexican American, but I am one of those lame border-crossed me ones who was really a Native American, if we're being honest. At any rate, I ignored my kindergarten teacher so much that she assumed I didn't speak English. I had skipped state testing because I had been to 6 to 7 elementary schools as my mom was skipping out on rent. Middle of first grade, a random teacher realizes I'm reading library books brought from home in the back and not doing my work. Not common in a special ed classroom. She called my mom and teacher to a meeting, had me tested as gifted, told my mom that I was pretending to not understand my teachers, and told us that in second grade I was going to be in her room. I was in trouble. For the first and last time in school. Looking back, this is such an impactful memory. She was the only teacher who cared about me at all. When they opened my backpack at the meeting, I had it packed with random books. I had encyclopedias from my grandparents' house, stuff from 3 school libraries, magazines, etc. Mrs. Judah changed my life because she cared enough to ask the librarian what language I spoke to help me pick more age-appropriate books. I was reading a high school level novel because the school had just been converted from K to 12. It turns out high school books were appropriate for me. Not age appropriate, but reading level. I love her and will never forget the stash of books she kept for me when they converted the library for K to 5. Story 7. The professor I had for my Calculus 100 class in university was awesome. He was a good teacher and funny and engaging. It was a first-year class with over 100 people in it. I was just a face in a big crowd. I was on campus after hours a couple years after I graduated. They run programs for kids in the evenings and were dropping off my oldest. And I saw him. He stopped, looked at me hard, and said my first and last name, and then said, "Not a bad student. Not great, but definitely not bad," and kept walking. This was a good 6 years after I graduated. Absolutely amazed he would have remembered me at all after teaching how many hundreds of students in between. That is just crazy. I had the opposite with my high school band director. When I was a senior in high school, I was walking down the hall with 2 of my friends who were also in band. At this point, I had been in band with this teacher for almost 4 years, saw him every day, and had one-on-one auditions and regular individual performance exams with him. He saw us walking by and greeted us. "Hey, John. Hey, Jennifer. Hey," drawing a complete blank on my name. I didn't take it too personally because he was really nice, but he was one of those people who was really focused on the music, to the exclusion of everything else, and was kind of flaky. I would not be surprised if he identified us all in his head by our instruments and the sound of our playing first, and faces and names a distant second. Story 8. Told me I was smart and could succeed. I had spent the past couple of years at a private school, trying so hard to prove myself. Despite doing well academically, I didn't quite fit their cookie-cutter mold, so I was looked down on by other students and administration. When I told the guidance counselor that I wanted to be pre-med and go to medical school after college, she pretty much told me to lower my expectations because I would not succeed. At the end of my college math class my senior year of high school, I ended up in my professor's office to look at what I had missed on my final. He told me that I had done well and that I could get my PhD in math if I wanted. That was not what I wanted to do, but when I told him I wanted to be pre-med, he looked at me and said, "You're going to do well in that. I know you'll succeed." 6 years later, and I'm halfway through my second year of medical school, and his words still ring in my mind. Story 9. Had the police come to the school because he had reason to believe I was smoking cigarettes and using drugs in 7th grade. No, both of my parents smoked in the house. I didn't even know I smelled like cigarettes until the police told me why they were searching my backpack, desk, and locker. Story 10. When I was in 7th grade, there was a teacher at my school that was essentially a love child of Santa and an elf. Dude was 5'2", over 300 pounds, and had a beard that would put Gimli to shame. My first ever conversation with this man ended with him saying, "Now you go get yourself something to eat, big man." It caught me so off guard, I didn't even realize what he had said until after I walked away. Story 11. My RE teacher tried to keep me behind for no reason. I'm a complete goody two-shoes, and he gave me my first ever detention for asking my friend about what textbook page we were reading after coming to class late following an appointment. The guy tried to make me pick bits of paper and rubber bands off the floor as he watched me do it. I walked out, with 0 consequences. Story 12. Not me, but my brother. He had one of those haircuts that was popular in the mid-90s, where you have a long fringe, maybe 5 inches, but skinhead the rest. He was a skateboarder. Anyway, the woodshop teacher decided that the haircut was a health and safety hazard, and swiftly cut his hair in front of the entire class while berating him and giving him a lecture on kids today, etc., etc. My brother was 12 and came home from school crying. My father was less than pleased and apparently went up to the school and made a right kerfuffle, as he should. My mother was very embarrassed by it all. I'll never forget. Story 13. When I was in 3rd grade, the teacher of my gifted program class, extra class we were pulled from mainstream to do a few hours a week, started berating me over raising my hand too quickly to answer questions, saying I needed to think longer and give others the chance to answer. She went on and on about how I had an attitude. I got upset, and she made me stand in front of the class when I started to cry. I know you're crying, and I don't care. It was my birthday, too. It was a class of about 8 students. One guy told me in high school that day was one of his clearest memories from elementary school. One of my most vivid memories of high school is an old English teacher mocking a fellow student's nervous stammer as she did her presentation in front of the class. When the student started crying, that teacher mocked her crying, then failed her for not completing the presentation because she was crying. We used to joke that we hoped that an old dried up piece of crap like her would drop dead in front of the class. I'm so sorry that happened to you, and I hope your subsequent birthdays have rocked. Story 14. Oh boy. Grade 3, I said, "Aw, crap," when I got tagged out, rounding second during a game of soccer baseball. Canadian term for kickball. A little girl covering the base screamed, "Teacher, negotiation fair said the C word." So I got put in detention and yelled at for the rest of the day until I finally snapped on my teacher at the end of the day and said, "Listen, teacher, I don't get it at all. All I said was aw crap when she caught the ball, and I didn't even know that that was a swear word." The teacher replied, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you said the other C word." I said, "What is the other C word?" She said, "Ask your mother." At the end of the day, I got into the van and told my mom what happened. She broke out laughing her ass off and explained to me when I asked that the word the teacher thought I had said was. I went to school the next day and said it to all my friends. Hey guys, guess what word I just learned? Story 15. Senior year of high school. I was on the wrestling team and I had cut about 30 pounds that year, from 170 down to 140. I happened to have the same math teacher 3 years in a row, so we really got to know each other. First name basis and all that. She knew how much weight I cut for the season. I told her, and it was obvious just from my face. I wasn't fat before my cut either. I had a six-pack. She had a strict no eating in class policy. That'll be important in a minute. The day after the wrestling season ends, I walk into math class and sit down. She walks over to my desk and puts a whole apple pie right in front of me. She knew it was my favorite, handed me a fork, and she said she'll ignore the no eating rule for one day. I finished that whole pie in maybe 30 minutes. Linda, I will never forget that. You absolutely made my day. Story 16. I have always loved learning and loved going to school. I was a good kid and never really got into trouble. One year, my parents got called in for a parent-teacher conference. One by one, each of my teachers told my parents that I acted out during class, was a distraction, etc. This came as a surprise to my parents, as I had never gotten in trouble, and my grades were always good. Finally, the conversation got to my history teacher and my science teacher. They were speechless. My history teacher told my parents that he wished he had a classroom full of students with a passion for learning like me, and that if the other teachers put in as much effort into teaching as I did into learning, then there would not be an issue. My science teacher agreed and apologized for wasting my parents' time. The rest of the school year was interesting. I could tell there was tension between certain groups of my teachers. My history teacher would later become the principal of that school, and I could not think of anyone more deserving of that role. Story 17. Freshman English teacher in college. He had a last name with 2 capital letters in it, so something like McConnor. On the top of one of my first papers, I wrote McConnor with 2 lowercase c's, and he told me that I spelt his name incorrectly. Now, obviously, this confused me because the spelling was indeed correct, and it took a few minutes of back and forth confusion before he told me what I did wrong. Like a typical 18-year-old, I just kind of shrugged it off, like, who cares? His response was essentially, if you don't care enough about your writing to get it correct, why the hell should somebody else care enough to read it? The response hit pretty close to home. Not initially, of course, because I was an 18-year-old, but now, 15 years later, I still think about it from time to time, and it does force me to put more of an effort into many of the things that I do. Story 18. My computer science teacher would belittle me in front of the other students and even asked me why I showed up for class. I hated his class and slowly just stopped doing the work and failed the class because he made me believe I was dumb and incapable. I'm currently working in an MSCS at a top 10 CS school and have plans to apply for PhD programs in CS next year. Story 19. 5th grade. Teacher was shaking with anger because I put my math problems horizontally instead of vertically, or something really stupid like that. She snapped at me for not being able to follow simple directions and humiliated me. When she went to look at the paper of the boy next to me, he said, I did it the same way. She smiled fondly and said, Oh, Robert, as if she was amused. Story 20. I once got expelled for smoking at school when at the time I never even smoked it. I was 13 and started crying, saying that I didn't smoke any. Since I was crying, my eyes got red, and then the teacher and principal said, Just look at how red your eyes are. You're ripped out of your mind. It got me kicked off our championship basketball team and everything. I will never forgive those two for what they did to me, and the stress they caused my single mother. Story 21. Wasn't so much what she did to or for me, as something she did with the entire class. 8th grade language arts class. She was a very cool person. Never looked at you with judgmental eyes, treated everyone the same and with respect and honesty, like we were equals to her. Anyways, the one thing that sticks out more than any other was the very first day of school. She made us all listen to a song. Didn't tell us why. Seemed kind of pointless and lame at the time. Last day of school, we played the same song. Can't even describe how I felt. The school years always seemed to drag on and on. Could never wait for summer. But when she played the song at the end of the year, it kind of brought the whole year together and made it seem like you had just walked in the door for the first time. For the life of me, I wish I could remember what that song was. Story 22. Had a teacher in 1st grade who was hella superstitious and stuff. One time, she told us if we slept with our feet out from under the blankets, someone would break into our house, cut off our feet, and then leave them on our front porch inside our shoes. It wasn't even near Halloween or anything. She was just saying it like it was actual advice. Scared the crap out of little kid me. Story 23. Guy sitting beside me had his head resting on his stacked fists on the desk, wide awake and paying attention. Teacher was walking up and down aisles, came up behind him and smacked him across the back of the head with the spine of a rather large business studies book while screeching, Pay attention. I will never forget the hollow thud sound. Poor effer was dazed for hours after. Story 24. My 6th grade teacher made us act out some Greek gods and helpers since we were doing mythology. A girl in my class decided to act out as Hermes. After she was done acting out as the character, the teacher looked her dead in the eye and said, That was gay. Why didn't you act out as a Greek goddess? The girl left the class crying.